Everyone.
Scary.
Well, Happy New Year. And it's a frosty, icy January. And what I like to do at the beginning of every episode is put this in history. So what's happening now? Well, we're starting to hear Donald Trump's plans for the future. A renamed Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Hints at raising the possibility of invading Denmark and Panama. And the social media giants this week have been changing the rules of, let's call it, conversation on the internet. Welcome to the Internet Seriously. I'm Lucian Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor in Oxford.
And I'm Kieran McCarthy in freezing London.
And today, we can't avoid the weather, can we? We keep coming back to it. It's British, that's what it is. But I'm really excited to announce our guest this week, which is Eleanor Dews, partner and head of data and privacy at Bates Wells. Eleanor, hello.
Hello, great to be here. Thank you so much.
Good to see you. And before we have a conversation with you, Emily's going to talk about that. Coming up today, in the UK, the pound has fallen to its lowest level in over a year, and government borrowing costs have surged to their highest level in 16 years. Economists warn of further tax rises or possibly cuts in spending, and how will this impact on the tech industry? And big other news this week, which we can't ignore. Mark Zuckerberg announces a U-turn on fact-checking on Meta platforms whilst wearing a $900,000 Swiss watch. Where are we heading with free speech on the internet, and what do we think about the $900,000 watch? Ray, there we go. Before I hand over to Emily to talk to Eleanor, please subscribe to this channel. We need you to like and share. You can see the buttons on the screen now. We need the crowd. We've got a bigger and bigger crowd joining us each week, which is fantastic. But please do subscribe and join. Thank you. Emily.
Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You were going to be here in person, but it's just so cold and icy out there.
Well, yes, let's talk about the weather.
Let's talk about the weather. Let's not talk about law. Let's talk about the weather.
I thought, Eleanor, you had Swedish blood in you. I thought it was all ice tyres and things like this.
What would a Swede make of this
weather? I
weather?
thought this would be fine. You weren't able to venture up as far as Oxford because it was cold?
A Swede would be appalled that in the temperature of merely -3, I couldn't make it. But I don't have all the kit. I don't have the car with the winter tyres, and I just thought,
and you don't, we're just not set up for this sort of weather, are we? In Sweden, it must be a complete breeze. This sort of only -3. What are you complaining about? Let's go on holiday. Let's do some swimming.
I'm not even going to start to talk about my mother-in-law's journey last night in an electric car in the dark. No. I'm not going to go there.
No, it was a Thelma and Louise moment. But Eleanor, you were, am I right? You were the UK's chief negotiator, or part of the negotiating team that negotiated the General Data Protection Regulation, known as GDPR. So that is it's really the flagship EU tech policy instrument. And, now, what are we? We're now 6-7 years in to the GDPR regime. And it would be really great to hear, how it's going compared to your expectations at the time when you negotiated that piece of legislation.
Absolutely. Yes, I was the lead lawyer, so I spent many hours in Brussels debating all of this. And personally, I had some real misgivings, and so did others, about what we were doing here. This enormously broad piece of legislation applying to every organisation in Europe and promising these incredibly powerful rights, and also applying extraterritorially. And we had real questions about how's that really going to work? Are you really sure that when you send the data abroad, it's going to be protected to this very high standard?
Can you just help me on the extraterritorially? I mean, it's a rhetorical question. I kind of guess it, but just for people who don't know what that means. So basically, Europe's making a law, and it doesn't just affect Europe. Is that right?
Exactly. So if you're linked to a European company or you're targeting the EU market, the idea is that you're still subject to those laws. So it's incredibly broad. But also, if you're receiving data from the EU, you have to apply these protections. So many organizations outside the EU are actually possibly, unbeknown to them, caught by this incredibly onerous set of rules. There was a lot of debate. In fact, that there were such misgivings, really, that it felt for a long time as if we weren't making any progress at all, because people were just saying, firstly, the drafting's a bit unclear here, putting in more and more drafting. I think drafting law in a committee is quite difficult to get it clear enough, but also just the really high standards we had some concerns about. In the end, it sort of rushed through at a political level, and all of the things that we were concerned about really remained in the text. And as things have played out over the last 6 or 7 years, I feel that a lot of our misgivings were absolutely right. I think the standards are so high. There's this lovely story about somebody going round in a data protection conference wearing a T-shirt which said, "Only God is GDPR compliant." And I often think of that when I'm talking to clients about it, because actually no one is fully compliant. And I think there's a real question mark there about, is it right to be putting out laws that no one can comply with? In a democracy, you would expect that, other countries that don't really believe in democracy do this deliberately. They have laws that no one can comply with, so everyone is vulnerable. And I really think in a properly democratic system, we shouldn't have laws which are aspirational but not enforceable.
And do you see, I mean, I've really seen the impact of the long arm jurisdiction in international discussions about domain policy and who is, for example, and really seen a culture clash between US participants and European ones. So the US participants come to this law, they're like, this has turnover-based fines. We've looked, it applies to us, or it might apply to us. Frankly, our data isn't segregated geographically in the way that we would like it to be, so we're just having to apply it across the board, and we're going to take a zero-risk approach here. So we're going to absolutely try to make sure that GDPR doesn't comply to us. But they take it so seriously. And I sense that, the Europeans who've lived in a data protection regime for now, 30 years, they're much more relaxed about it than the Americans. But it's really disrupted cross-border data flows, especially for law enforcement, hasn't it? Do you sense that sort of, difference between the US and the EU type of approach on it?
Definitely. I mean, I think trying to explain how this works to US clients who don't know much about it, it's hard. It's a completely different approach to what they're used to. It does apply extraterritorially, so they need to know about it and they need to comply with it. But yeah, there is sometimes a situation where you are in a real dilemma, because the US law is telling you to do one thing and the EU law tells you to do another. And putting companies in that position is really invidious, particularly where we need those cross-border data flows. So much of our data is stored in the US. We need that tech power to run our companies and to store our data. And we're all being put in a position which is incredibly difficult. And I think the EU deliberately really wanted to export GDPR as a statement of its values, but didn't really think about, how is this going to work where other jurisdictions don't accept those values? So I think they've created some real problems there that it's impossible for organisations to resolve. It really needs government to sit down and have an honest conversation, both within the EU, but also with partners. How do we do this properly? Because cross-border data flow is absolutely key. I mean, the International Chamber of Commerce has said that now cross-border data flows are more valuable than the global trade in goods, and I think they're going to contribute $11 trillion this year to the global economy. And all our new technologies need personal data. That's what powers them, really. So those cross-border data flows really could enhance the technologies that we're trying to develop, which could be so positive for the world. But we're hampering that by not really accepting and coming together and applying some realistic and common standards.
And Eleanor, just hallelujah to that. I mean, we feel that very much with a new project that we're doing with Google and others, which requires cross-border data flows for threat intelligence sharing. And I'm fascinated by how we can resolve all of that in the light of GDPR. But also a pet hate of mine is new cookie notices, and that we're sort of almost bombarded with cookie notices, which are very heavy, very gaming us, to actually I've got software on my browser that tries to automatically dismiss cookie notices, and in the most negative way I can, i.e. not agree, I don't agree, I don't want to agree. But with some of them you have to go through pages and pages and pages of vendor disagreement as well. I mean, you didn't actually write this stuff, did you? You were actually on the.
Don't blame Ellen.
I'm trying to carve.
Come on the show.
I'm trying to.
She specialised in the cookie. It's her.
I'm trying not to. No, I'm trying to carve this out and say, Eleanor, your role in this was to sort of be a voice, wasn't it? You weren't sitting there writing the whole thing.
No, I mean, it was written by the European Commission, by the lawyers in the European Commission, and we commented on it. And I have to say, the UK, I think, was a very pragmatic voice in the EU. We sort of said, how is this actually going to work in practice? So it was those sorts of comments. And sometimes we weren't very popular. There's one delegation, I won't mention them. Every time we put up our flag to say we wanted to speak, and we'd say, not sure about this, they'd come in and say, we completely disagree with the UK. Yeah. Then we had lunch with them and they said, we've been told we have to disagree with you because you're so Eurosceptic, but we actually agree with everything
you say. Yes. Kieran, over to you for a question or two for Eleanor.
Well, so sort of leading on from that, I mean, here's a question that you're not going to love, which is Brexit, right? So we're now out of the EU. Is there? We've been hunting around for some kind of benefit for however many years now. Is there an actual legislative benefit possibly to find our way through, come up with laws that benefit the UK by not going this sort of slightly unusual EU route?
I think that's certainly possible in theory, but what I've really noticed since Brexit is that this idea of the Brexit dividend, of doing things differently, just doesn't seem to be being delivered on. So we're reforming our data protection law. Potentially we could have done something brilliant here. We could have really simplified it and future-proofed it, because I think these really detailed laws are really problematic. We're already seeing GDPR doesn't quite fit with, the EU AI Act, for example. So I think this was an opportunity to do something different. But the government isn't doing that. They're sticking with the same rules. They're not really changing them. There's a bill going through making a few tweaks to UK GDPR. But there's a real absence, I think, of policy and vision on what Brexit could mean. And instead, I think we're sort of trailing behind, not quite sure what we're doing, and we'll probably just have to implement a lot of EU rules that we weren't at the table to negotiate.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
I think you're totally
I remember
right. But
at the time of Brexit, I think it was a government official from one of the Nordic countries said, yeah, but what about us? If the UK leaves, and it's a bit like what you were saying, Eleanor, the UK was a moderating, pragmatic voice in the negotiations. And since the Brexit, that voice has been, has gone, really. And a lot of the smaller countries that perhaps would have a moderate and pragmatic approach are in such a minority now. That it seems like the EU have gone, like, how many pieces of digital legislation are there that have come out of the EU now?
I was going to say the same thing, which is that they seem to have taken GDPR, which is literally a bogeyman in the corporate world, and said, "Oh, this worked really well. Let's do this again." You know, so we've got NIS2, which does a little bit of that. We've got the AI Act, which does a little bit of that. So you're speaking our language. I think we've all the people pragmatically doing this have been driven a bit mad by this legislation. So, I mean, why does the EU think that this was a success?
Well, it has been exported. I mean, so many jurisdictions have got similar laws now. But I don't think the EU, if it's really honest, and I think that the Draghi report that came out, which sort of talked about how we're going to get growth in Europe, I think this recognises that actually GDPR was a huge burden. It is a huge burden to organisations and isn't really improving people's privacy rights. It still is the Wild West out there. You know, things like privacy notices that are supposed to be so privacy enhancing would take over a month to read all the privacy notices that we're supposed to be looking at when our data's being used. So it is all just a bit of a fiction, quite frankly.
It's become a tech game, you know, and that's the thing. When you make these very brittle laws as techies, it's so easy to just game all of that with very rich privacy notices that leave people stuck in this mode that they can't get out of until they basically agree to hand over everything. But look, we went to Brexit and then we're going into this sinkhole. So, Eleanor Dews, it's time for our guilty pleasure online. We need some more clickbait. Eleanor Dews, what is your guilty pleasure online?
I'm afraid if I go onto Facebook and go onto the Reels, I'm stuck there for ages. And the thing that I absolutely love is the clips from the Graham Norton show. They're so funny. There's a brilliant story that Hugh Grant told about his mum going to a dinner party just after he'd become famous. And someone said to her, "And what do your sons do, Mrs. Grant?" And she said, "Well, one of them's a movie star and the other's a banker." And the person said, "How marvellous. Which bank?" I love that sort of thing.
Can you remind me of Reels? Are they like short? I don't watch Facebook Reels, but I watch shorts on YouTube, which are just like 1 minute things. And they are quite addictive, sadly. But are Reels similar to that?
Exactly. Yeah. Especially when they're funny, you just want another one.
And you just do, and you feel like your brain is idling. What was that word, Kieran? You found a word for? Is it brain rot?
Brain rot, yeah.
Brain rot. That you just sort of like, you feel like your brain has gone into an altered state, but it's actually really nice, isn't it? It's
Emily,
lovely.
your next question.
Oh, yes, I have
Eleanor.
some quick fire yes-no answer questions for you, Eleanor. Number 1, so yes-no answers only.
Okay.
Go with your first response. Is privacy an absolute right?
No.
Thank you. Does GDPR prevent the sharing of data for crime fighting?
No.
Would you agree that lawyers are much more fun and adorable than people think?
Yes. We are.
We are, but people
Leading
don't
the witness, Your Honour, leading the witness.
Oh, I take the 5th on this. I'm married to one.
Still married.
I'm still married to one.
Your current wife is a lawyer.
I'm really, really happy. Anyway, the UK pound has fallen to its lowest level in over a year, and government borrowing costs have surged to their highest level in 16 years. Economists warn of further tax rises and cuts in spending. How will this impact on the tech industry? Emily?
Oh, it's just so depressing, isn't it? I mean, this government came in, I thought they were being really clever and they were keeping all of their ideas under wraps and they were going to surprise us all with their brilliance and their ideas, and they just don't have any ideas. But the one thing that came through in the election campaign was "we're all about growth," which sounded really positive for tech and really positive for small businesses. And since they've come in, small businesses particularly, and actually this isn't just the current government, small businesses have had an enormous increased tax burden over the last 15 years. And also, so there's now going to be real deterrence for growing your employee base, and the sort of investment that you need to create that growth and innovation. You know, the tech industry.
So you're
is
saying
be
they didn't have bold ideas?
I don't think they have bold ideas. No.
Kieran. Full disclosure, Kieran McCarthy, journalist, campaigned as a Lib Dem candidate in Putney, and raised their margin in Putney, let's put it that way. But we are looking at and talking to...
I think my economic ideas for Putney were better than this government's idea.
Well, but Emily says they didn't have bold ideas. I thought their tax rises were bold.
Oh, they were bold. They were also
hugest,
stupid.
Hugest bold tax rises you could get. Their public sector pay rises were bold. They didn't need any meetings. They didn't need to meet for 3 years like they're doing with the social care reform bill. They just raised those 22% pay rises at a stroke.
I'm feeling miserable now, and this is supposed to be fun.
Oh, I'm having fun because you're saying they're not doing any bold ideas. I've just named 2.
There's a difference between being bold and being intelligent. You know,
I'm going to say that every day for the rest of my life.
You can be bold. You can walk into a pub and pick a fight with somebody. It doesn't mean it's a smart thing to do. No, I think it's. I mean, they've really. It's really depressing. I really did think, I had a lot of sort of hope that they would come up with some good ideas. They certainly had enough time. They certainly knew they were going to become the government. No one was surprised by that. But it's been, I don't know, there's this very old Labour thinking that's stuck in there, and I don't think they're in 2025 on any level. So taxing and saying it's not taxing, but taxing employers is, when we need to grow an economy, is madness. Putting this tax on private schools is irritating a huge chunk of society. They needed to be sort of on side. And then you just look at what the market's doing. They said they'd do growth, but then they paid massive. Now, I have some sympathy for the pay rises. We're underpaying people. But just to pay it off, just to be done with it and get out the way. I mean, it's all pointing in the wrong direction. Yeah. And the markets have made it abundantly clear that they think it's going the wrong direction. I mean, it's a disaster.
Eleanor, I don't know, it's not, without getting into left and right politics, I've been a socialist all my life, but I've found this an absolute drought of politics at the moment. It's impossible to really see what the best thing is. As a business owner or part owner, I should be a conservative, with all of those sort of pressures on small business, taxes, taxing employers, all of those employees rather. Sorry, I wasn't planning to even talk about this at all really. But this sort of stuff is difficult. What's your view on what's happening at the moment in terms of the legal profession? If not, I want to get into the tech profession, possible impact on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is finding it tough, and our clients are finding it tough, and that obviously has an effect on us. And as for kind of new ideas and growth, I mean, one example of a lack of new ideas is the government has basically just recycled the old Conservative government's data protection and digital information bill and put it back through Parliament. And you just think, why? There's nothing new in there at all. They've just adopted, just picked up where the old government left off. And that is really depressing, because this is an area, as we're discussing, where, a bit of innovative thinking would be brilliant and really good for the UK, but it's just not there.
And I was, this is a little bit of a passion project of mine, because one place where I think there is money is going to be in the health sector. And I was, and it badly needs, and I say this as somebody who worked in the health service very briefly until I had an immediate nervous breakdown for working in the health service. But I was working in the informatics department, information and technology. And what was badly lacking was good information and technology, because it's expensive. So the stuff that EasyJet has, is what the health service needs for booking appointments. And they have nothing like that. It's just, my daughter has just resigned from the health service because of the prehistoric sort of systems that have been set up that need review and overhauling. It's going to be expensive. These are areas where you have potential for big IT developments and big information speeding up of things, which at the moment are so draggy. West Streeting this week, the health secretary has announced a social care reform audit, and they've given themselves 3 years to just have that audit and come up with an idea.
3 years. I mean, 3 years. How can they do that?
And I can see that the health service is heading for just the Americanization, getting companies like Salesforce to adapt their software, and then we end up sort of paying these licenses to America forever for these juggernaut projects. I'm interested in your view, Emily, on where this is heading.
Well, again, I think we should move on, because we're now going into a complete depression, and I just want to pull the duvet over my head and wake up in a different world.
Well,
I mean,
that says it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like Kieran was saying, I was really hopeful that this government was going to put the sort of the love and the love and investment that the public sector has been absolutely drained of for the last 15 years. And again, they're just buying themselves 3 years to think up a possible solution to something that everybody knows is a huge problem, which is the care of elderly people. We've just been through that. So many families are affected by the cost of care of elderly people, and that will take the entire family's wealth and just end up paying care costs for it. That was something that none of us thought we were signing up for in a national health service, and it's clearly a problem that's going to get worse with the ageing population, the lack of population renewal. So there, I said I didn't want to talk about it. Here I go. I'm on my soapbox.
Thank you,
again.
everyone. Right, now, well, it's obviously time to cheer ourselves up again. So let's talk about something we hate. It's time for our Tech Room 101. 101. Eleanor Dews. What is your Tech Room 101? What would you like to... what internet-y thing would you like to throw in the bin forever?
It's got to be smart glasses. I mean, bonkers, absolutely bonkers. I watched some footage of some Harvard students recently wearing smart glasses, going up to people in a train station and saying hello and saying people's name. And they were absolutely shocked. I mean, what is the use of that? It's really, really creepy. So I'm against those. Room 101.
What is the point of them? Is it so that you can check your emails in meetings without having to look down?
Oh, I mean, maybe, but why? We've all got phones. People are always checking them.
I think there are two guys here that would quite like a pair of these glasses.
Okay, let's
horrific though they are.
I can see Kieran's gone quiet. We haven't heard from Kieran.
There's elements that I quite like about the idea.
Just squeezing out a little bit of negativity.
Seriously though, the
These
facial
really
recognition, I'm terrible with names. If I could just install my own contacts and say, oh, hi, and get my own friends and colleagues' names right first time, that would be really nice.
Oh, actually, this would be great for Lucian for my Irish family parties, because I have 40 first cousins, and they've all got, wives, husbands, loads of kids, and you do need the eye in the sky to go, who's this?
But you also need the phonetics with Irish names, written phonetically on the screen in front of you.
Yes, exactly. So we're coming up for our final topic, and I'm really fascinated.
Hang on, are we allowed to put it in the Room 101 or not?
Oh, I see.
Oh, what about you, Lucian? So
do I
Kieran's
judge?
a little bit. Kieran wants it. No, you're not the judge. I just want to hear what you think about the smart glasses. Because I'm with Eleanor. I think they're creepy and useless, and they also make people look vacant and stupid when they're wearing them. There.
I think they're a sort of like a guilty pleasure, really. I've got to publicly say I don't like them. So
mix the streams between guilty pleasure and 101.
Definitely in the Tech Room 101.
That
I am required to say. So anyway, moving on. I'm really interested, Eleanor, in your view of two aspects to what was announced by announced this week. One was Meta doing... I'm going to do a full disclosure. Every now and again, we have to talk about our funders. Meta are one of a number of funders that we desire for funding with our global signal exchange platform. And we're approaching all... I don't think we're being paid by Meta. We're under any contract with Meta at the moment, but we are trying to. So these organizations we talk about It's a bit like Chatham House, isn't it, Emily? There's a whole stack of organisations that they chat about. Sometimes they even slag them off in intellectual debate, but they are also funding them as Chatham House members.
When you have many, many, many funders like
That's
Chatham
what
House
we want.
does,
That's what
then
we
you
want.
can say what you like about any of them. But yes.
When you've got 4, you've got to be a little more sensitive. But I think
let's ask Eleanor about it.
We're going to ask Eleanor about Mark Zuckerberg, who's announced a U-turn on fact-checking on Meta platforms. And the other aspect I wanted to talk about was that he was wearing a $900,000 Swiss watch. Pick either of those, Eleanor.
I mean, I think it's really worrying about scrapping the fact-checking because it's very clear, there was a UN report which said that misinformation about the Rohingya Muslims has actually led to people being killed on a really large scale. In India, we've seen the same thing, Facebook being used in really detrimental ways to spread misinformation about particular groups in society, leading to violence. Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, said that, this was about putting profits before people. And the Nobel Peace Laureate as well, Maria Ressa, has said, we're going to be moving to a world without facts if we carry on like this, which is ripe for dictatorships. So I'm really worried about it. I don't think it's good for our democracies, and I think it's a really detrimental move. Obviously, he's under pressure from Trump to do this, and he's succumbed to that. But that may be why Nick Clegg has departed in the last few days.
Oh, you speculate in a very interesting way as well. And I mean, I'm just I'm struggling to find the other side of this argument. The Economist is arguing that the end of fact-checking is correct, and one of its own oversight board members, I can't remember her name, a Danish lady or a Dutch lady, herself admitted that while the old system was bad, so there's some view, not just amongst sort of Zuckerberg himself, that the system is bad. She's saying there are huge problems in what Mark Zuckerberg has just announced. So it's sort of not the end of the game. But isn't there a sense, just taking Trump's argument, it's my job, Eleanor, to try and sort of like sort of balance these arguments. Taking his Mark's new mate Trump's argument, is it sort of anti-right-wing rhetoric? Is it having a go? Is the fact-checking anti-right-wing?
I mean, politicians should not be so irresponsible as to deliberately mislead the public about what is going on, and that should not be amplified by the internet. And I just think, both of those things are happening, and it's really, really dangerous for our democracies. So I think fact-checking, a world without facts, is a world where you can convince people of things which are so detrimental, turn them against each other, really tear at the fabric of our society. So I think it's really concerning. And free speech, again, we're going back to sort of, are the rights absolute? Free speech is not an absolute right. You can't incite violence and just sort of, forget about the consequences. And online, as well as the real world, needs to be regulated.
And we were talking earlier, weren't we, Eleanor, about the differences between the US and the EU. And I think anybody who's thinking about digital regulation realises you need some sort of commonality in the approach, at least across democracies. Isn't this move going to place the US on a collision course with EU laws? So those very platforms have legal obligations to do a lot of the things that Trump would scrap, that Elon Musk, his sidekick, has scrapped. So how is this going to play out in the next 4 years, do you think?
I think it's going to be really problematic. I mean, I think it's not just this, invasion of Greenland and other,
Denmark, I think.
Denmark. I mean, just all these crazy things where, Trump seems to want to be a big disruptor. but does he really, or is this all just a sort of the apprentice-style tough negotiating position, and he doesn't really mean any of it? I mean, I think certainly on the free speech, Zuckerberg has been lent on very heavily by him, and I think Trump says whatever he likes, doesn't he? And the fact checkers say a lot of it isn't true. So an environment where he's not pulled up on that, I imagine, is one that he would like to create. But yes, there will be a huge clash with the EU on this.
Kieran, apart from the clash of rhetoric and law, which I can anticipate is just going to roll and roll. I mean, everyone's really wound up by Trump, and it's like they're so easy. He finds it so easy to bully them and wind everyone up. They just get so cross, all the Commission and everybody in Germany and everyone. But you lived in America for 4 years under Donald. I hasten to add you made plans to leave practically as soon as he was elected. But does he actually do anything?
No. It's all about being constantly in the papers, in the media, everybody talking about. That's his power. That's the power you give him by constantly talking about him and every stupid thing that he says. And it's worked for him. But on a more interesting note, I literally have some hot off the press polling on this issue. Obviously, a lot of people are looking at it, and I know someone who actually helped me out a little bit during my campaign, who runs a polling company, and he's done some polling on this fact-checking issue. And apparently 79% of people think fact-checking is the most important protection that there is against misinformation. Wow. There's just 62% saying viewing multiple sources and 60% saying critical thinking. So that really is important. We really are in trouble.
But the more interesting thing,
here's what I love.
The BBC.
Sorry, but here's what I love is that that the people most worried about it are kids worried about their parents. So actually, kids have got increasingly, fluent in looking at misinformation. Not that they're all completely aware of it, but they're most worried about their parents and misinformation. So there's going to be a little bit of a generational thing, and they're just going to learn the skills of how to identify misinformation. And it's actually the older generation, our generation and up, that are going to be the biggest problem right now.
I mean, that's the point I wanted to say, was we don't have to accept this, do we? We don't have to stop checking our own facts. I mean, the Meta platform is not going to check facts itself, but you see the BBC all the time continually fact-checking things.
But I think the fact that it's there on the post as you experience it, and you've got that feedback right there as you're experiencing and digesting the information, is such an integral part of, because if you have to, it's like anything, like default settings. As soon as you have to do something positive to go and educate yourself, to go and check something out, 90% of people won't.
This is going to roll and roll. Kieran, did you want to finish with a final point on this?
Well, so let's try and be optimistic. Yeah. I mean, God, this has been a depressing episode, hasn't it? Optimistically, I hope that this puts everybody into the arms of journalists, because journalists' job, or at least it used to be, is to actually provide, as far as you can, objective information and news, and have a whole bunch of morals and ethics around feeding misinformation that you just don't do it. So if anything positive can come out of it, is that we start paying journalists for good information, and then all of this nonsense will start fading away, because you can start reaching a baseline of agreement of reality again.
We've only got ourselves to blame about the topic, because I did put an Easter egg in there of a $900,000 Swiss watch that Mark Zuckerberg was wearing during, and that's raised as much commentary, in my view, on the BBC.
That's because of your watch community that you've got sucked into.
I've got a question, Lucian.
We're just moving on to slagging off me.
I'm really intrigued. How does a watch cost that much?
Yes.
Like, why am I getting on my face?
It's your glasses. It's your special glasses.
But once a watch costs more than, I don't know, $3,000, what on earth are you buying?
Yes.
I don't understand.
This is nearly $1 million Swiss watch.
Wow.
Eleanor, do you think that gives him more gravitas? Do you think that sort of lends weight to the statement?
I think it's horrifying. It just shows the enormous divide between, I think it's 3.3 billion people who are accessing the platforms and the news, and this tiny group of horrifically rich people. And I think that gap is something that is bad for society and for the world, and we need to resolve that.
These are important messages that impact internet people like us who aren't able to afford $900,000 watches and are just trying to make bits of kit work and trying to stay within the law and within privacy laws and trying to write our privacy notices and give that as much credence as our software itself. Do we have Voice of God? Do we have a comment of the week?
No. It's a new series.
We should have checked that in advance, to be fair.
I kind of knew. We were. It's the beginning of a new series, so yeah. Voice of God. We don't have to get that defensive. It's all right. We're all allowed a holiday
the voice
without
of God being defensive. It's like, you try doing it.
So this week we have been discussing the UK pound falling to its lowest level and the economy in general and its potential impact on the internet industry. The comments about Mark Zuckerberg, his announcement on a U-turn on fact-checking on Meta platforms, and a lot to say about that, not much to say about his $1 million watch. But mainly we've been talking to our lovely guest, Eleanor Dews, partner and head of data and privacy at Bates Wells. Eleanor, I'm a real fan of yours. I loved hearing you at the talks that I've seen and things that you've written, and you've been fascinating today. And we're going to get you on again particularly as these laws and things unfold. But thank you for your time today.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Take care. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.